The news from Guyana, the region and the world. Compiled in the News Talk Radio newsroom and powered by DemeraraWaves.com.
The news comes to you compliments of KFC. It's finger licking good. First, the highlights. Former Public Works Minister under the APNU-AFC coalition government, David Patterson, accused the National Procurement and Tender Administration Board failure to conduct due diligence before awarding contracts breeds corruption, an obligation of the board. The APNU and AFC are still to settle unresolved issues, causing rifts between the two coalition partners. Opposition leader Joseph Harman has criticized the government's handling of the pandemic as he calls on citizens to be responsible and get vaccinated. The director of the Pan American Health Organization, PAHO, says relaxing of COVID measures threatens the gains made to lower COVID infections in the region. In the region, Grenadian legislators are soon to debate legislation seeking to decriminalize the use of marijuana and allowing for anyone over the age of 18 to have no more than 28 grams of the drug in their possession for personal use. And Venezuelan regional and local elections last weekend were held under better conditions, the head of the European Union Observation Mission said on Tuesday, but declined to say if the vote was free and fair. And internationally, French authorities say 31 migrants headed for the UK have drowned in the channel near Calais, after their boat sank, in French. Details of these and other stories in a moment.
Is it a special occasion? Are you on a budget but still want a filling and also mouth-watering meal? Look no further. KFC is here for you at 9 locations and 6 drive-thrus, including the Amazonia Mall at Providence, which now delivers from Shore Base to Little Diamond. Call 632-0533, 6080162, or 503-3591. KFC.
It's finger licking good.
With the news at this time, I am Ruth Wilson. Good evening. And now the news in detail. Former Public Works Minister under the APNU-AFC coalition government, David Patterson, says the National Procurement and Tender Administration Board, NPTAB, continued failure to conduct due diligence before awarding contracts breeds corruption. The former public infrastructure minister says NPTAB since 2017 under the APNU-AFC coalition administration, an obligation was placed on the tender board to conduct due diligence.
Under the coalition term from 2017 onwards, in response to efforts by some bidders to attempt to submit fraudulent information in their tenders, NPTAB was required to conduct a full due diligence on the recommended bidder before approving the recommendations of the evaluators. NPTAB were required to check and confirm the validities of the company's registration and other source documents. And additionally, since they were the entity that had all the historical records on all government procurement awards, it was also their responsibility to ensure that no bidder submitted incorrect previous work experience details.
Mr. David Patterson says the comment by the chairman of the board falsely declared that due diligence was not a requirement in defense of the award of a contract to a new local company.
This comment was made in response to questions pertaining to the award of a contract of $346 million to Statement Investment Inc. for the construction of the Bamia Primary School in Linden. The award to a company that was only registered 6 months ago and has no similar work experience should have immediately made their bid unresponsive based on the tender requirements. This has correctly raised questions on the role of NPTAB.
In the absence of the Public Procurement Commission, NPTAB awards of contracts have come under scrutiny. Public concerns were raised over the decision to award a $346 million contract to Statement Construction for the construction of a primary school at Bamia, Region 10. A bipartisan committee set up to resolve existing rifts between the Partnership for National Unity and Alliance for Change, APNU AFC has left some matters outstanding, including chairmanship and vice chairmanship of Region 4 Demerara Mahaica, controlled by the coalition. General Secretary of the AFC, David Patterson, says the two parties met and resolved several outstanding issues, but some key issues are still not addressed.
The bipartisan committee did submit a report, and I think that they had several recommendations. Some of them are still outstanding, and the primary one, so we were satisfied with the process. We participated quite fully. Our members and the APNU members. However, some of the recommendations, including the discussion on the chairmanship of Region 4, have not been resolved.
The AFC is likely to again move a motion of no confidence against the chairman, Daniel Siram, and vice chairman, Samuel Sandy. The AFC General Secretary, says the AFC is assessing the matter.
Our position is that we will seek further clarification to see what was the errors, if any, even if we have to seek legal opinions or ask the council to seek legal opinions on the validity of motions in general, so that we could be so guided, and after that we shall make our decisions on what is to be proceeded with.
The AFC Region 4 Demerara Mahaica councillors want the chairman and vice chairman removed from office over claims of poor performance that has led to a loss of jobs and non-payment of persons. The AFC says its councillors have highlighted several grave concerns, including the suspension of the Regional Administration of Committees meetings without informing councillors and the sidelining of the AFC. The AFC has publicly complained about alienation and exclusion of the AFC and its representatives by the Region 4 chairman, who also chairs several key committees, including those on tourism and drainage. Opposition leader Joseph Harmon has criticized the government for its poor handling of the COVID pandemic in Guyana, as he again calls for a unified approach to fighting the pandemic. Opposition leader Joseph Harmon came out with harsh criticism for the government, with October and November registering the highest COVID deaths in Guyana.
The last 2 months have been our deadliest months, but this government continues to do less by encouraging careless and reckless actions through its COVID-19 measures. You see, not all of us can set up sanitation units in our yards, and therefore the problem we have is that when the government relaxes measures, cover up cases in schools and public offices, cover up and have no monitoring of public transport, relax the curfew, fail to manage COVID-19 hotspots, the perception that is being created is that the virus is no longer as deadly or as contagious.
Mr. Joseph Harmon says the inability of the government to devise a plan beyond vaccination is hurting the vulnerable groups more. He urged the citizens to get vaccinated and be responsible.
As we have said before to citizens, over a year now, please take all necessary measures to keep yourselves and your loved ones safe. Continue to wear your mask, sanitize, and wash your hands. Stay away from crowds. Get vaccinated. If you are unsure, get clearance from a doctor. But by all means, get vaccinated. I know food prices are high, but eat as healthy as you can. Vaccines help, and so do our other actions. So I'm urging all citizens to ensure that we take the necessary steps to deal with this COVID-19 virus. The government is doing nothing to help us.
The opposition leader says citizens must now take responsibility for themselves in the absence of prudent action on the part of the government. The director of the Pan American Health Organization, PAHO, says relaxing of COVID measures threatens the gains made to lower COVID infections in the region. The director, Dr. Carissa Etienne, pointed to Europe, which is experiencing more waves of COVID infections as they relax measures and are now forced to lock down again. Dr. Etienne says the Caribbean is vulnerable and following in the path of Europe is inadvisable.
Even though vaccination coverage is not as high as we'd hope, in many densely populated areas, the Americas, preventive measures have been lifted or relaxed. And this is a worrisome combination that keeps us vulnerable to the virus and threatens our hard-fought gains. With the approaching holidays and upcoming summer vacations in the Southern Hemisphere, I wish to take a moment to remind everyone that our individual and collective decisions chart the path of this pandemic.
The PAHO director says the region still falls short of vaccination targets.
While 51% of people across Latin America and the Caribbean have been fully vaccinated against COVID-19, there are 19 countries in our region that have not reached the WHO targets to vaccinate 40% of the population of every country by the end of this year and 70% by mid-2022.
Guyana, as of Tuesday, November 23, fully vaccinated 53% of its adult population. Dr. Etienne says the last Christmas season taught us a lesson of COVID surge after the holidays and urged people to be responsible during the holidays.
But as we have said time and time again, vaccines are not the only tool to protect us against COVID. And that's why the last point I want to stress is that public health measures are key to reducing the spread of this virus. Mask wearing, social distancing, and avoiding large gatherings, especially indoors, will remain important, even as more of us get vaccinated. There is no room for complacency because we've already faced the consequences of an uncontrolled pandemic, and we don't want to be in that position again.
The PAHO director warned against large gatherings during the Christmas and urged persons to get vaccinated. Guyana has seen a decline in positive cases overall, but is warned by the Guyana Ministry of Health that 3 regions, 2, 3, and 8, are still registering high infection rates. The government has adjusted the curfew hours to allow more time for businesses to operate. An East Berbice Quarantine Region 6 55-year-old fully vaccinated male is the lone COVID death recorded in the last 24 hours, taking the death toll to 980. The Health Ministry recorded 79 new COVID cases in the last 24 hours. The data shows 12 persons seriously sick and being treated in the COVID intensive care unit. Another 75 persons are hospitalized, while 4 persons are quarantined by the ministry. That is in addition to 1,722 persons who tested positive and instructed to isolate themselves at home. The ministry says its vaccination program has partially immunized 397,612 adults and 28,874 children ages 12 to 17 years old. There are now 272,701 fully vaccinated adults and 20,075 children ages 12 to 17 years old. You're still with us on News Talk Radio Guyana 103.1 FM. It's 18 hours 14. We now turn to news in the region. Spokesperson on education for the Democratic Labour Party, Neil Marshall, says the Ministry of Education must share an alternative plan early should face-to-face classes not resume as planned in January next year. Mr. Neil Marshall, an attorney at law, says that current infection numbers were trending upwards in all of the country's tourism source markets, which would translate into increased cases in Barbados. According to Nation News, Marshall quoted the World Health Organization, WHO, as saying that coronavirus deaths in Europe rose 5% in the last week, making it the only region in the world where COVID-19 deaths increased. The St. Philip South candidates suggested that given current global trends, the planned school reopening might not be a practical reality. He listed issues that have plagued the educational system from the inception of the pandemic and which have not been adequately addressed, and gave solutions as to how the government could implement alternative plans, including wider access to internet services, reliable electronic devices, and the provision of food and nutrition. He says too many children still have no devices. He says internet access without a device is like having raw food with no means of cooking it. Marshall emphasized that the Ministry of Education must ensure all school children have access to the necessary electronic devices that would allow them to participate in the online platform. Marshall also suggested that school meals workers not involved with COVID assignments be deployed to provide sustenance for children whose parents were having difficulties. Marshall says it is clear the government have become a law unto itself at the expense of taxpayers, and urged education officials to listen to advice and be more proactive in their approach. Grenadian legislators are soon to debate legislation seeking to decriminalize the use of marijuana, as well as allowing for anyone over the age of 18 to have no more than 28 grams of the drug in their possession for personal use. Loop News reported that Agriculture Minister Peter Davis is to table the amendment to the drug abuse bill at the upcoming session of Parliament scheduled for Friday. The main objectives of the amendment are to allow anyone over 18 years to be in possession of 28 grams or 0.987671 ounces of marijuana, and to allow each homeowner over the age of 18 to grow no more than 5 trees. Rastafarians will be able to use the herb solely for religious purposes, as a sacrament in adherence to the Rastafarian faith, and at a place of worship. The legislation also indicates that, notwithstanding the provisions of the Act, the minister may by order designate any premises or place as a place of worship of the Rastafarian faith for the purpose of this Act. Despite the legislation for people to be in possession of marijuana, smoking in a public place will be prohibited, and a person who smokes or uses cannabis or cannabis resin in a public place commits an offense and is liable on summary conviction to a fine of $500 EC. The legislation allows the minister to prescribe a list of approved public places where the smoking of cannabis or cannabis resin may be allowed. A person who, whilst under the influence of cannabis, operates, navigates, or is in actual physical control of any motor vehicle, aircraft, or ship, or does anything which constitutes the negligence, professional malpractice, or professional misconduct, commits an offense and is liable on summary conviction to a fine of $500 EC. Dominica and China have signed an agreement for visa-free travel between the two countries, with Prime Minister Roosevelt Skerrit saying it underscores the ongoing strong relationship between Beijing and Roseau. According to Loop News, Prime Minister Roosevelt Skerrit says the consideration by China through bilateral relations are entrenched in Dominica's recognition that there is but one. Skerrit signed the agreement on Monday with the newly accredited Chinese ambassador Lin Jianjiang, who had earlier indicated that Beijing wanted to push its relations with Dominica to new heights. The visa-free agreement takes effect immediately. Dominica and China formally established diplomatic relations in March of 2004. Venezuelan regional and local elections last weekend were held under better conditions than those of previous contests, the head of a European Union's observation mission said on Tuesday, while declining to say whether the vote was free and fair. A Reuters report says the Sunday vote was the first time in 4 years the country's opposition has run candidate, though it suffered a resounding defeat with the ruling party winning at least 18 out of 23 governorships. The socialist government of President Nicolas Maduro has long faced accusations of anti-democratic practices from the United States and other critics, although the presence of the EU observers was seen by some as conferring a modicum of legitimacy on the process. Maduro has said the observers carried out their mission very well so far, while other senior members of the ruling party refer to observers as peepers and accuse them of arriving in the country with pre-written reports. Observers witnessed the use of band control points meant to track which government supporters cast ballots, and structural deficiencies remain. Santos declined multiple times to say whether the vote was free and fair and called for the observers' eventual final report not to be used as a political instrument. Some polling places suffered delays in opening and closing times, she says, though voting machines were trustworthy. The National Electoral Authority is more politically balanced than it has been in 20 years, as she added that balance is key to building public trust. Opposition figures had questioned the fairness of constant coverage of government candidates on state television and sales of subsidized food ahead of voting. Santos lamented the murder of one voter in Zulia State who was killed while waiting in line. She says one electoral observer and 2 human rights workers had suffered aggressions in Lara State. More than 1,000 polling places in 23 states, were visited by 136 observers, Santos said, and her team will release a final report in late January or early February. It's 18 hours at 21. We now join the BBC for the international news.
BBC News with Sue Montgomery. 31 people, including a child, have drowned in the Channel off France after a dinghy carrying migrants sank. 2 people have been rescued. It's the deadliest such incident since the Channel between England and France became a major route for migrants. Fishermen near Calais said calm weather had prompted more people than usual to attempt the crossing. Jean-Marc Puissasseau, the head of the ports of Calais and Boulogne, spoke to the BBC.
It's a tragedy. People who get money from the migrants to get to your country. And we let the people going on the boat with such a weather, with such waivers, they are murders. They are really murders. And of course, we are all so upset. We are used to the migrants and we know that cannot continue.
The British Prime Minister Boris Johnson said the disaster showed that more needed to be done to break up the people trafficking gangs. He accused them of getting away with murder. A jury in the U.S. state of Georgia has found 3 white men guilty of murdering a black man who was jogging in the city of Brunswick last year. The killing of Ahmaud Arbery, along with that of George Floyd in Minneapolis, helped inspire the Black Lives Matter movement. From Washington, here's Gary O'Donoghue.
When the first guilty verdict was read out, Ahmaud Arbery's father, Marcus, shouted, leapt to his feet and was heard to say, "Long time coming." He was then removed from the court. The judge then proceeded to list guilty verdicts in all counts against Travis McMichael, who'd pulled the trigger, and in all but 1 count against his father. Both, along with their neighbour, William Roddy Bryan, could face life in prison without parole.
The incoming coalition government in Germany, to be led by a Social Democrat for the first time in 16 years, says it will make tackling climate change its top priority. Olaf Scholz, who will replace Angela Merkel as Chancellor, announced plans for 80% of Germany's energy to come from renewable supplies by the end of the decade. Sweden's first female Prime Minister, Magdalena Andersson, has resigned hours after being voted into office by Parliament. Maddie Savage reports from Stockholm.
Instead of celebrating victory, Magdalena Andersson quickly found herself in the midst of a political crisis. Her centre-left government saw its budget voted down by Parliament in favour of an alternative proposal from right-wing opponents. Then its coalition partner, the Green Party, quit the government, saying it didn't want any part in that budget because it was partly negotiated by the nationalist Sweden Democrats. Magdalena Andersson told a news conference she was resigning because she didn't want to lead an administration facing questions about its legitimacy.
World News from the BBC. Libya's Electoral Commission has rejected a son of the late military leader Muammar Gaddafi as a potential candidate in next month's presidential election. Saif al-Islam Gaddafi, who is wanted by the International Criminal Court for alleged war crimes, was among 25 candidates whose applications were rejected by the Commission. Other controversial presidential hopefuls include the military commander Khalifa Haftar. The United Nations has accused Iran of flouting its international obligations after executing a young man convicted of a murder he was accused of committing as a youth. A spokeswoman for the UN Human Rights Office described the execution of Arman Abdullahi as deeply alarming and shocking. Amnesty International said the court relied on torture-tainted confessions. Tanzania has lifted a ban on pregnant students attending school or being allowed to continue their education after giving birth. Correspondents say Tanzania's first female president, Samia Suluhu Hassan, had been under pressure to lift the ban since taking up the job last year. The chief executive of Tanzania's Legal and Human Rights Centre, Anna Henga, gave the announcement a cautious welcome.
Our happiness will be 100% once we see a bill tabled in Parliament amending that law or providing for the procedures for girls to go back to school. That will be perfect in 100%. But for now, we are still seeing it as a promise. We are not sure whether it will be implemented or not.
A bus carrying 15 people in Haiti has been hijacked by a criminal gang. Local media reported that the vehicle was taking workers from a shipping company to the town of Bassin Bleu when it was intercepted by heavily armed men. The bus driver managed to escape. Haiti is suffering a sustained political and economic crisis. BBC News.
And that's the news to the moment.
Hate to stand in lines? Don't worry. KFC has got you covered with their drive-thrus, which are open now from 9 a.m. to 10:30 p.m. at Movietown, Vlissingen Road, Mandela Avenue, Reading Hoop, Parika, and the Amazonia Mall. That's right, you can drive through at 6 of their 9 locations. Remember, their current opening hours are 9 a.m. to 10:30 p.m. Go on down and let your taste buds savor the spices today. KFC.
It's finger-licking good.
To end the news, here's a recap of the highlights. Former Public Works Minister under the APNU-AFC coalition government, David Patterson, accused the National Procurement and Tender Administration Board failure to conduct due diligence before awarding contracts breeds corruption, an obligation of the board. The APNU and AFC are still to settle unresolved issues, causing rifts between the two coalition partners. Opposition leader Joseph Harman has criticized the government's handling of the pandemic as he calls on citizens to be responsible and get vaccinated. The director of the Pan American Health Organization, PAHO, says relaxing of COVID measures threatens the gains made to lower COVID infections in the region. Regionally, Grenadian legislators are soon to debate legislation seeking to decriminalize the use of marijuana and allowing for anyone over the age of 18 to have no more than 28 grams of the drug in their possession for personal use. Venezuelan regional and local elections last weekend were held under better conditions, the head of a European Union's observation mission said on Tuesday, but declined to say if the vote was free and fair. And internationally, French authorities say 31 migrants headed for the UK have drowned in the channel near Calais after their boat sank in French. That was the news, which came to you with the compliments of the competition. Came to you compliments of KFC.
This has been the news, compiled in the News Talk Radio Newsroom. For ongoing updates, visit demerarawaves.com and you can check facebook.com/demwaves and twitter.com/demwaves.